From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, August 15, 2025. Anthony Albanese believes Australia can help broker peace in Gaza under a Saudi Arabian-led proposal that could see Arab nations send in peacekeepers. Tributes are flowing for the beloved film critic David Stratton, who's died at the age of 85. He wrote reviews for The Australian for more than 3 decades, and you can read all about his life and legacy right now at theaustralian.com.au. A 4-day work week, caps on your super balance, a tax on electric vehicles. These are some of the ideas being floated for discussion at a big shindig in Canberra next week, an economic roundtable that the Treasurer says will help shape his next 3 budgets. Today, political editor Geoff Chambers joins me to work out what's credible and what's crazy. Geoff Chambers is The Australian's political editor, and like most people with big jobs, I think Geoff works about 7 days a week. Would that be right, Geoff?
I try not to, but I think for most Australians, they're not sitting there watching the clock. They're trying to do the best at their job, and there's no real right to disconnect, as some of the unions like to suggest that there is.
Well, the latest idea from the union movement is a 4-day working week, but the twist is you'd be paid for 5 days. Geoff, why are they talking about this now?
Look, the ACTU has predictably rolled out a shopping list of completely unworkable ideas, and they quite often know that they are so radical that they will never actually get up. And at the top of that list is this idea of a 4-day working week, but you get paid full time for the full 5 days. So it's like, let's all work less and take more holidays, which is another one of their proposals that they've floated to increase productivity. Not quite sure how that works. And this type of spooky music, radicalism from the ACTU really puts the fright into the private sector, business, industry leaders who attend these forums. So the unions have already won the right to disconnect, which was a very symbolic thing that Labor did for them. But if you're a small business owner, you never really can disconnect, just to keep food on the table and pay the bills. And for that fact, the very staffers and journalists here in Parliament, but the staffers that work for these Labor ministers, they often chuckle to me that there is no right to disconnect for them. So it's all a bit of a show.
But that's not all, folks. Sally McManus, the boss of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, the ACTU, is also calling for $25 billion in new or higher taxes, a limit of 1 property for negative gearing, changes to capital gains tax and more. McManus says this is about making life fairer, particularly for young people who can't get into the housing market.
Working people can't live where they work, they can't live where they grew up. It is causing an enormous amount of pressure for people, and a really disturbing thing is that a study in New South Wales said that there will be no grandchildren in Sydney because people between the ages of 30 and 40 can't afford to live there.
So why are we suddenly hearing all these new ideas? Because on Monday, Treasurer Jim Chalmers is kicking off something called the Economic Reform Roundtable, a summit of business, unions and decision makers aimed at working out how to position Australia for the future. One of the hot issues on the table is artificial intelligence. Obviously, we're on the cusp of a huge change technologically, a big leap forward. They're talking about this as the new industrial revolution, where suddenly all of us are going to have very eager virtual assistants who are helping us do our jobs. Businesses and the government and the Productivity Commission all say they want Australians to adopt generative AI, to start using it. Do you think that is how we're actually going to make the economy more productive now?
I think that sort of blanket conversation about everyday workers and businesses using generative AI is probably not that helpful. I think talking about the more targeted applications of AI and what that could practically do to allow all of us to be more productive in our lives, our day-to-day, both at home and at work, is a more practical way forward. And what does that mean? Well, you really have to actually educate people. And the big boardrooms of the big companies, They've got a whole army of people that are dedicated to understanding it and how to apply it. But then as you get down to those smaller businesses, of which we obviously know there's multi-million small businesses, the art of this whole process is to not leave them behind.
Here's another part of the puzzle. The companies creating great AI tools include Google and Meta, whom the government is presently warring with over social media bans for kids. So how to police them without leaving Australia behind on the AI revolution?
These companies are based in America predominantly, but they're in Europe, they're in China. We really are watching what Europe and the US are doing in that regulatory space, and they can't really land it. We really need some of our big allies and friends in the West to put some systems in place that we can follow. But then we also, as little old Australia here, the island nation, with a much smaller population and smaller economy, we can't be left behind in the AI revolution. So it's a really challenging space. And what makes it even more challenging is the speed of those technological advances.
Yeah, I had an example of it this morning. There's a book that I've got to read for work because it's a project that we're working on, and it's a big book. It's 150,000 words. I haven't managed to get around to it yet, but one of the AI tools that we're allowed to use here in News Corp is called Notebook Large Language Model, and you can dump something into it and then tell it to spit out a podcast episode for you. You know, this is scary for people like me who work in podcasts, but this is not something we'd ever publish. So this morning I uploaded the book into the AI and I told it to make a little podcast episode for me and tell me what's happening in this book. What's it all about?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're unpacking,
And it generated 10 minutes of audio with 2 AI voices talking about the book and telling me all the main points and what I needed to know.
And why was that significant?
Well, they were cheaper, sure, but critically, their visas were tied to their contracts. That made them really...
And I could listen to that while I was driving into the office. That's a productivity advance, isn't it? Like, that's how we actually harness this technology.
Yeah, I mean, in a really simple sense, you can digest a very complex, long report or video or audio recording, and the technology is actually getting a lot better, even in the space of the last 2 years. So as a journalist, if I'm interviewing someone, and the old-fashioned way was to listen back to the tape and tap out the words, the technology is actually really improving that it's almost word perfect, but then you can also get a summary, and the summaries are quite good. So that will make you more productive in a really simple way, day to day. Now, when you think about students at school, primary school, high school, university, and when you're thinking about the different professions and how that applies, I think that's the important part of the story. Okay, what jobs become redundant through this process and how do we adapt to that? Are we happy for a call centre to not be based overseas, but to have a really amazing AI set up call centre that we feel confident in? And I think confidence in that service and delivery is key to getting more and more Australians to adopt these types of technologies.
One of the things that the union movement said when they asked for this 4-day week or put it on their shopping list was that they wanted to be able to reap the benefits of productivity. So this is how workers can enjoy an extra day off a week while AI goes and does some of the tasks that they don't need to do anymore. This is a really interesting political issue for Jim Chalmers to manage now, isn't it? He needs the unions to be on board with the adoption of AI, presumably. But if their idea is great, we can all take a day off, is that useful for him?
We're in such an uncertain space in terms of understanding what an economy-wide effect AI has. I think if you're a government or a treasurer and you want to speed up your clean energy revolution to hit your climate and renewables targets, if you want to unlock more housing quicker, if you want to simplify environmental processes and laws, simplify bureaucracies, I think that for him is a really big top priority is, okay, we've got this ridiculously antiquated system where we can't get approvals through quick enough. I think there are some genuine divisions in the government in relation to a regulatory environment, whether you let it rip or whether some of those checks have to be in place, it's really challenging to actually impose regulations, expect results from those regulations and penalties without holding the country back. So it's a very tricky situation for Jim Chalmers.
Coming up, what about taxes on electric vehicles? Back when this idea was launched, Anthony Albanese called it a productivity roundtable. Then Jim Chalmers changed it to the much more lofty-sounding economic reform roundtable. And that's what's prompted this flurry of ideas from the unions, the Productivity Commission, businesses. Now the government's saying this will just be an ideas forum. They're not committing to anything. One possible outcome is a road user charge, basically a tax on electric vehicles. The states and territories want this to replace the fuel excise that drivers of petrol cars pay. That's a huge source of revenue that's dwindling as EVs become more popular.
Particularly if you're in the outer suburbs or in regional Australia, we need roads and transport networks that are super efficient so that people aren't sitting in gridlock and can get to work, get home, see their families, all the rest of it. But without a sustainable system, we won't be able to have that money to do that. So there is a lot of momentum now, and Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese have more or less said it's happening. And I think in the first instance, they might start trialling it on, say, EV trucks, just to try and get the technology right before a broader rollout.
Isn't there a risk, though, Jeff, that this knocks off kilter one of the government's other goals, which is to increase the uptake of EVs, basically make the planet less polluted?
Yeah, so the EV Council and advocates for EVs say that any contemplation of a road user charge shouldn't occur until 30% of new car sales are EVs. The flip side is that there are now settings in place that are incentivising automatically that push towards EVs. Exemptions on fringe benefit tax, exemptions on vehicle stamp duty, free rego. There is another model you could do as well, which would be have fuel excise still in place and have a road user charge system. And if they design it in a way where the road user charge system is less ultimately across the year than a fuel car, again, that's another incentive for people to buy EVs or hybrids.
Jeff Chambers is the Australian's political editor. We'll be all over this roundtable and all the ideas it throws up. You can follow it live and read all our analysis at theaustralian.com.au.